I was halfway through the Friday payroll reconciliation, which means I was staring at a spreadsheet of technician hours and comparing them to the GPS pings from the company vans. It's a tedious process of hunting for the 15-minute gaps where a tech stopped for a sandwich but billed it as travel time. I like the reconciliation. It's the only part of the week where the numbers are supposed to add up. And if they don't, there is a concrete reason why. The office was humming with the usual end-of-week noise. The printer jamming, the phone ringing with a panicked homeowner whose furnace had died in the middle of a Salem drizzle, and the smell of damp wool coats hanging by the door. Sarah, our office coordinator, leaned over my cubicle wall. She was holding a stack of invoices and looking a little frayed. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she had a smudge of ink on her chin. "Hey, Des," she said. "I just wanted to double-check the schedule for next week. I saw the note about you heading out at noon on Fridays for the next month. I've already shifted the vendor meetings to Tuesday mornings to make sure you don't miss them." I stopped typing. I didn't look up from the screen for a few seconds because I was trying to figure out which part of the sentence I had misheard. "What note?" I asked. Sarah blinked. "The one about your mother-in-law. The caregiving thing. I thought you and Donald had finally worked out a rotation." I looked at her then. Sarah's a good employee, but she tends to fill in the blanks when she's stressed. I haven't made any arrangements to leave at noon on Fridays. I'm not taking a modified schedule. Sarah frowned, her brow furrowing. "That's weird. I could have sworn I saw an email. Or maybe Donald mentioned it when he stopped by to drop off your lunch last Tuesday. He said you guys were dealing with some health stuff with Karen and that you'd be carving out that time." I felt a sharp, cold prickle at the back of my neck. Donald had stopped by with lunch. Yes, but we had talked about the hotel's new occupancy rates and the fact that his manager was a nightmare. We hadn't discussed my work schedule. We hadn't discussed carving out time. "I didn't send an email," I said. I opened my sent folder and typed Friday into the search bar. Nothing. I checked my calendar. Every Friday for the next month was blocked out with 2 p.m. site audits and a 4 p.m. team wrap-up. "Maybe it was a text," Sarah suggested. She shifted her weight and her voice dropped. "Anyway, I'm sorry to bring it up while you're busy. My husband is having a really hard time with his new meds. He's been having these night terrors, and I've been trying to figure out if I can take a few hours off on Mondays to help him settle in, but I didn't want to ask because I know how tight we are on staffing." I didn't even look at her. I was still staring at the blank search results in my email. The idea that someone, especially Donald, was telling people in my professional circle that I was less available or that my family obligations were overriding my role as manager felt like a physical weight on my chest. "Sarah, I can't really deal with the Monday thing right now," I said, my voice clipped. "I need to figure out who is telling people I'm leaving at noon." "Did you actually see a written note? Or did Donald just say it?" Sarah stepped back, her expression flattening. "He said it. He sounded pretty sure. I just thought I was doing you a favor by clearing the meetings." "Right, well, let's just keep the schedule as it is. I'm not leaving early." She didn't say anything else. She just turned and walked back to her desk. I could tell by the way her shoulders tightened that I'd brushed her off too hard. But the Friday thing was a glitch in my system, and I couldn't focus on her husband's medication until the glitch was explained. I spent the next hour in a state of precise, focused agitation. I checked the shared family calendar on my phone. Nothing. I checked the texts between Donald and me from the last 2 weeks. We talked about grocery lists, the leaking faucet in the shared side yard of the duplex, and the weather. No mention of a Friday rotation. Then I remembered the mail. I walked over to my bag and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper I'd tucked into the side pocket. It was an insurance notice regarding Karen's supplemental health coverage, a notice that had been mailed to our house but was clearly intended for her. It listed a series of specialist appointments in Portland that were scheduled for Friday afternoons. I remembered Karen calling me 3 days ago, sounding fragile and breathless, telling me that the drive to Portland was becoming an ordeal, and that she didn't know how she'd manage the trip. I had told her I'd look at the dates and see if I could help, but I hadn't promised anything. I had specifically told her I'd check my audit schedule first. I sat back down and looked at the insurance notice. The dates matched. Every single appointment was on a Friday. I stayed in my chair, staring at the insurance notice until the ink seemed to blur. I didn't move for 5 minutes. I just listed the facts in my head. Karen had appointments in Portland. The appointments were on Fridays. Donald had told my office coordinator that I was leaving early on Fridays. I opened my computer and logged into the joint email account we used for utilities and the mortgage. I went to the sent folder. There it was. An email sent Wednesday afternoon to Sarah. Hi Sarah, this is Donald. Desiree asked me to let you know she'll need to head out at noon on Fridays for the next few weeks to help her mother with some medical trips. She's tied up with a project right now and couldn't get to the keyboard. Thanks for understanding. I felt a pulse in my temple. It wasn't a scream, it was a rhythmic, precise throb. He hadn't just gossiped. He had impersonated me to my own staff. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Marcus Thorne, the property manager for the Mid-Valley complex. He was one of our 3 largest commercial accounts, the kind of client who measured his satisfaction in the exact minute a technician arrived. Desiree, Marcus said. He sounded clipped. I'm looking at my calendar for tomorrow. I have a cancellation notice here from your office saying the 2 p.m. walkthrough is postponed indefinitely. I don't remember agreeing to a postponement. I didn't cancel that walkthrough, Marcus, I said. Well, the email said you had a family emergency and couldn't make it. I can't push this back. The owners are coming in on Monday to inspect the HVAC upgrades. If we don't sign off on the ductwork tomorrow, the whole project timeline slips. I'll be there at 2, I said. I'm sorry for the confusion. There was an administrative error. Just make sure you're there, Marcus replied. He hung up. I sat back and looked at the screen. The administrative error was my husband. The cost was a precarious relationship with a client who already thought we were too expensive. If Marcus felt I was unreliable, he wouldn't hesitate to move the contract to a firm in Eugene. Mike, one of my senior techs, stepped into my cubicle. He looked exhausted. His work shirt stained with grease and dust. He was holding his phone. Hey, Des, Mike said. Listen, my daughter's school called. She's got a fever of 103 and I've got to go pick her up. I can finish the call at the Miller house, but I might need someone to swing by the warehouse to pick up the new compressor for the morning job so I can head straight home. I didn't look at the photo of his daughter he was trying to show me. I didn't ask if she was okay. I was thinking about the joint email account and the Mid-Valley complex. Mike, I can't deal with scheduling shifts right now, I said. I have a crisis with the Thorne account. Just call the warehouse and see if they can stage the compressor on the loading dock for you to grab on your way out. I can't spend the next 20 minutes rearranging the board. Mike paused. He slowly lowered his phone. Right, okay. I'll figure it out. He walked away, and I noticed he didn't look back. I knew I'd been short with him, but the logic felt sound to me at the time. Mike's daughter had a fever. That happened every winter. My professional reputation was being dismantled by a series of emails sent from my own living room. One was a temporary illness. The other was a systemic breach of trust. I left the office at 5:15. The drive back to the duplex was slow. It had been a dry week, and the air had that heavy, metallic scent of distant wildfire smoke drifting in from the east, the kind that makes the sky look bruised. When I walked through the front door, the house smelled like the pot roast Donald had started in the slow cooker. It was a domestic, comforting smell that suddenly felt like a lie. Donald was in the kitchen, humming something, leaning against the counter with a glass of water. Hey, honey, he said. How was the day? I didn't put my bag down. I stood in the entryway and looked at him. Why did you email Sarah? Donald stopped humming. He didn't look surprised, which was the most irritating part. He looked like he had been expecting the question and had already rehearsed the answer. I was just trying to help, he said. Your mother was practically in tears on the phone. She can't do those Portland drives alone. Des, she's 77. She was terrified she'd have to cancel the specialists. I told her I would check my schedule, I said. I told her I'd see if I could help. I never told you to tell my office coordinator that I was changing my hours. You were stressed. Donald said, shifting his weight. I knew if I asked you, you'd just start listing all the reasons why it wouldn't work. I figured I'd just handle the logistics, and you'd be relieved when it was already sorted. You didn't handle logistics, Donald. You lied. You told Sarah I asked you to do it. You made me look like I couldn't manage my own calendar. It's just a few hours on a Friday, he said. He took a sip of water. It's not a big deal. Your mother needs us. We're the dependable ones, remember? That's how this family works. The way this family works is that I manage my job, I said. Marcus Thorne called me today because his walkthrough was canceled. He thinks I'm unreliable. Donald frowned. I didn't cancel any walkthroughs. Sarah did. Because she thought I was leaving at noon. Because you told her I was. He looked away, staring at the pot roast. I didn't think she'd actually move your appointments. I thought she'd just make a note of it. You don't get to decide how my employees interpret a lie, I said. I walked past him and went into the bedroom, closing the door behind me. I didn't want to hear the part where he told me I was being too rigid. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my phone. I had a text from Mike. Daughter's fine. I handled the compressor. See you Monday. The text felt like a small, cold stone in my pocket. I had ranked Mike's problem as insignificant compared to mine, and in doing so, I had pushed away the one person in the office who actually had my back. I lay back on the mattress, listening to the muffled sound of Donald moving around in the kitchen, still pretending the roast was the most important thing in the house. I didn't come out for the pot roast. I stayed in the bedroom with the door shut, listening to the sound of the slow cooker clicking and the muffled noise of the television in the living room. I lay there and started to map out the last 6 months, looking for the other glitches I had ignored. I remembered November. I had been overseeing a commercial install for a new medical clinic in Kaiser. It was a high-pressure job with a hard deadline. If the air wasn't scrubbed and the temperature stabilized by Thursday, the clinic couldn't open. On Tuesday afternoon, Donald had called me, his voice sounding tight and breathless. He told me Karen had taken a bad fall in the bathroom and was semi-conscious and disoriented. I had left the job site immediately. I remember the drive. The windshield wipers slapping rhythmically against a freezing rain that turned the roads into a gray blur. I had walked into the house in a state of near panic, only to find Karen sitting at the kitchen table in a pale blue cardigan, eating a piece of cinnamon toast. At the time, Donald had told me she'd had a vasovagal episode, and that she'd been delirious for 20 minutes before he got her settled. He'd looked at me with such a mixture of exhaustion and pity that I had felt an immediate, crushing guilt for the 10 minutes I'd spent arguing with the contractor about the ductwork before I walked out the door. I had spent the rest of that week checking in on her every 2 hours, rearranging my site visits, and apologizing to my crew for my erratic schedule. Now, lying on the bed, I thought about the cinnamon toast. I thought about the way Karen had looked at me. Not frightened, but expectant. I remembered that she hadn't even known what day of the week it was when I arrived, but she'd known exactly where her favorite tea was. The semi-conscious part had been Donald's phrasing. The delirium had been his interpretation. I realized then that the emergencies weren't accidents. They were tests, or maybe they were just tools. Every time I was gaining momentum at work, or every time I had a project that required my full, undivided attention, a crisis appeared that only I could solve. Donald didn't see it as sabotage. He saw it as managing the family. He was building a version of my life where my professional boundaries were permeable, where I was the default safety net, because I was the only one capable of holding the weight. Monday morning arrived with a heavy clinging fog that blurred the edges of the duplex. I didn't speak to Donald during breakfast. I just drank my coffee and checked my phone. The Mid-Valley walkthrough was at 9 a.m. I had spent the weekend obsessing over the ductwork sign-off. I had the paperwork ready, but I knew the system was finicky. The Mid-Valley complex had an aging boiler integrated with new HVAC units, and the pressure sensors often tripped if the sequence wasn't exactly right. Mike was the only technician who had spent enough time in those crawl spaces to know the trick to resetting the sensors without triggering a full system lockout. I arrived at the complex at 8:15 a.m. Marcus Thorne was already there, standing by the main intake with a clipboard and a look of profound impatience. "You're early," Marcus said. "Good. Let's get this over with. The owners are landing at the airport at 10, and they want the sign-off in their inbox by 11. I went to the control panel and flipped the sequence. There was a metallic clunk, a hiss of air, and then a sharp electronic beep. The red vault light flickered on. The system had locked out. "Damn it," I whispered. I tried the manual override, but the sensor wouldn't reset. It was the exact glitch Mike had warned me about 3 weeks ago. He'd told me the sensor was failing and needed a specific bypass that jump to hold it during a walkthrough. I had told him to just put in a work order for the replacement part and that we'd deal with it during the next scheduled maintenance. I pulled out my phone and called Mike. He answered on the third ring. He sounded distant. The background noise filled with the sounds of a crowded waiting room. "Hey, Des." His voice was flat. "Mike, I'm at Mid-Valley. The sensor just tripped and I can't get the lockout to clear. I need you to swing by here right now and do the bypass jump. I can't get the sign off without it." There was a pause. I could hear a child coughing in the background. "I can't, Des," Mike said. "I'm at the clinic with my daughter. Her fever broke, but she's got a secondary ear infection and the doctor wants to see her this morning. I told you on Friday I was struggling with the schedule." "Mike, this is the Thorn account. If I don't get this signed off in the next hour, we risk the whole contract. Can't you just leave for 20 minutes? I'll pay you double for the hour." "I can't leave her here," Mike replied. He didn't sound angry. He sounded indifferent. "I'll be in at my regular time, around 10:30 after the appointment. If you can't get it working, maybe one of the other techs can figure it out. The other techs don't know the system like you do," I said, my voice rising. "This is a crisis, Mike." "I'm sorry to hear that," he said. "I'll see you at 10:30. He hung up. I stood there in the damp morning air, staring at the red fault light. I felt a sudden sharp memory of Friday afternoon. The way I had looked past Mike's phone. The way I had told him I couldn't spend 20 minutes rearranging the board because my own crisis was more important. Marcus Thorne didn't look at the red fault light. He looked at his watch. He did this every 30 seconds, a small, rhythmic flick of the wrist that felt like a countdown. I stood there in the damp morning air, the smell of wet asphalt and old grease clinging to my clothes, feeling the full weight of the silence between me and my phone. "I can't get the lockout to clear, Marcus," I said. "My lead tech is delayed. He'll be here by 10:30. "The owners are landing at 10, Marcus said. His voice was flat, devoid of any empathy. "I told you this was a hard deadline. If the sign-off isn't in the inbox by 11, I have to report a project delay to the board. That's a penalty on the contract. Desiree, I understand. I'm doing everything I can." "Doing everything you can would have been having a technician here at 9. He didn't yell. He just stood there, a wall of professional disappointment. I spent the next 90 minutes in a state of precise, vibrating anxiety. I tried every manual reset I knew. I checked the wiring on the pressure sensors. I even tried to call another tech, but they were all tied up with a burst pipe over on Commercial Street. I was the manager, but in that moment, I was just a woman staring at a red light that wouldn't turn green. Mike arrived at 10:35. He didn't apologize for being late. He didn't mention his daughter. He just walked up to the panel, performed the bypass jump in about 40 seconds, and watched the system hum back to life. "There you go," Mike said. He didn't look at me. I signed the paperwork with Marcus, who didn't thank me. He just took the clipboard and walked away. As Mike packed his tools, I started to say something. Maybe an apology, or maybe a question about his daughter. But he had already turned toward the van. "I'll see you tomorrow, Des," he said. I drove home in a fog that felt like it was inside my head. I didn't go into the kitchen. I didn't check the mail. I went straight to the living room where Karen was sitting in her favorite wingback chair, a knitted throw over her legs, and a crossword puzzle in her lap. Donald was in the hallway, putting away a load of laundry. "Karen," I said, "I want to talk about the Portland appointments." Karen didn't look up from her puzzle. "I'm in the middle of a clue, dear. Something about a Mediterranean island." "Look at me, Karen." She looked up. Her eyes were clear, bright, and entirely devoid of the fragility she'd displayed on the phone 3 days ago. There was no breathlessness, no tremor in her hands. Donald told my office that I was changing my schedule to drive you to Portland on Fridays, I said. He told them I asked him to do it. He also told me you were terrified of the drive. Karen sighed, a long theatrical sound. It is a long drive. Desiree. My nerves aren't what they used to be. Donald just wanted to make sure I was taken care of. He knows how focused you get on your work. I am focused on my work because I pay for the insurance that covers those appointments, I said. And I'm focused on it because when I'm not, people like Marcus Thorne start wondering if I'm reliable. Donald stepped into the room, sensing the shift in the air. Des, why are you making this a thing? We're a family. We handle things. I just smoothed over the logistics so you didn't have to stress about it. You didn't smooth anything, I said, turning to him. You lied to my employee. You impersonated me in an email. You bypassed me entirely because you decided that your mother's preference for a chauffeur was more important than my professional reputation. She's 77, Donald snapped. She can't just be left to figure it out. She needs to know she's a priority. And what about Mike? I asked. My lead tech's daughter had a 103-degree fever on Friday. I told him I couldn't deal with his scheduling shift because I was too busy dealing with the crisis you two created. Today, that cost me nearly 2 hours of a client's patience and a potential penalty on a contract. Karen shifted in her chair, her expression flattening into something cold. I don't see why a stranger's child is being brought into this. I am your mother-in-law. I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw the pattern clearly. The semi-conscious fall in November. The delirium, the terrified drives. It wasn't about health, it was about status. If she was in a state of constant managed crisis, she remained the center of the house. She ensured that Donald remained her primary protector, and that I remained the secondary support system, always one phone call away from dropping everything. She didn't want the drive to be easy. She wanted the effort of the drive to be a testament to her importance. I looked at Donald, then back at Karen. I knew I had failed Mike. I had spent years ranking everyone's problems in my head, deciding whose crisis was a real emergency and whose was just an inconvenience. All without ever asking them what they actually needed. I'd treated Mike's daughter like a footnote because my own stress felt more urgent. But that didn't excuse the deception. You didn't just smooth things over, Donald, I said. You chose to lie to my staff because you were too cowardly to have a difficult conversation with me about how to actually handle your mother's care. Donald opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't give him the space. I'm not the default safety net for a crisis that is manufactured for comfort. From now on, if Karen needs a ride to Portland, you drive her. If your schedule doesn't allow it, we will pay for a medical transport service. Medical transport service. I've already looked up the rates for the shuttle from Salem to Portland. It's $85 each way. Donald stared at me. He didn't look at Karen, and he didn't look at the laundry basket he was still holding. $85? That's ridiculous. We can't just pay a stranger to drive her when we have a perfectly good car. Then you drive her, I said, because I'm not the one who decides when she's terrified anymore. I'm not the one who manages the logistics of her comfort at the expense of my job. Karen made a small, clicking sound with her tongue. I suppose I'll just have to miss my appointments. I'll just have to hope for the best with my heart. You won't miss them, I said, my voice flat. Donald will take you, or the shuttle will, but I will be at my desk on Fridays until 5. I walked out of the room and went back into the bedroom. I didn't lock the door, but I sat on the bed and waited. I expected Donald to come in and argue, to tell me I was being cruel, or that I was forgetting who we were as a family. He didn't. I heard the laundry basket hit the floor in the hallway and the muffled sound of him talking to his mother in low, urgent tones. The shift didn't happen overnight. For the next few weeks, the house felt like a pressurized chamber. Donald stopped humming in the kitchen. Karen stopped asking me for help with her crossword puzzles. They moved around each other in a silent, coordinated dance of martyrdom, and I was the villain in the script. The real test came 3 weeks later on a Friday. I was in the middle of a quarterly budget review, staring at the rising cost of copper piping and trying to figure out where we could trim the fat without sacrificing the quality of the installs. Around 11:30 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Donald. I didn't answer it on the first ring. I finished the line I was typing, saved the document, and then picked up. Des, you need to come home, Donald said. He sounded breathless, that same tight quality he'd used back in November. Karen's dizzy. She tried to stand up to get some water, and she nearly went down. I think it might be her blood pressure. I can't leave her alone to go get the medication from the pharmacy. I felt that old familiar pull, the instinct to drop everything, to rank this emergency as the top priority and clear the board. But I stopped. I looked at the clock. I had a 1 p.m. meeting with a new contractor. Is she conscious? I asked. Yes, but she's shaking, Des. Did you call her doctor's office? Not yet. I thought I'd call you first. Call the doctor first, I said. If the doctor says it's an emergency, call 911. If it's not, you can drive her to the pharmacy. I'm in the middle of the budget review. You're really not coming? Donald's voice sounded small. She's your mother-in-law. And you're her son, I replied. I'll check in with you at 5. Bye, Donald. I hung up. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a fast, uneven rhythm. I felt a surge of guilt that tasted like copper. But I stayed in my chair. I didn't check the joint email. I didn't call back. I forced myself to look at the copper piping costs. At 12:15 p.m., Mike walked into my office. He was carrying 2 coffees and looking at me with a guarded expression. I saw the schedule for tomorrow, Mike said. I noticed you blocked out an hour for me to do the training with the new hire. I appreciate that. Usually, you just tell me to squeeze it in between calls. I looked at him. I remembered the way I dismissed his daughter's fever, the way I'd treated his life like a variable I could just move around to suit my own stress. I realized I was ranking things wrong, Mike, I said. I'm sorry about Friday and about your daughter. How is she doing? Mike paused, the coffee cup shifting in his grip. He didn't give me a polished answer or a grand forgiveness. He just shrugged. She's okay. Ear infection cleared up. She's back to being a terror. Good, I said. If you need to shift something next week for her, just tell me. We'll make it work. Mike nodded slowly. He didn't smile, but the tension in his shoulders dropped an inch. Thanks, Des. When I finally drove home at 5:30 p.m., the house was quiet. I walked into the living room and found Karen sitting in her wingback chair, sipping a cup of tea. She looked perfectly fine. Donald was in the kitchen, looking exhausted and irritable. The doctor said it was just dehydration, Donald muttered as I walked past. She forgot to drink water all morning. I had to spend my whole lunch break on the phone with the clinic and then run to the pharmacy. Sounds like you handled it, I said. I didn't ask if she was feeling better. I didn't apologize for not coming home. I just went into the bedroom and started taking off my work clothes. I hadn't won a public victory. Marcus Thorne still viewed me with a certain level of suspicion, and my relationship with Donald had shifted into something colder, more transactional. We didn't have the dependable family myth anymore. We had a set of rules. I knew I had changed my role. I wasn't the manager of the house anymore. I wasn't the one who smoothed over the gaps or absorbed the shocks. I had stepped out of the role of the default safety net and into the role of a woman who had a job, a life, and a limit. I lay back on the bed, listening to the distant sound of the television in the other room. The house wasn't peaceful, but it was quieter. I didn't feel the need to check my phone or scan for the next glitch. I just closed my eyes and listened to the silence of a Friday evening where I had actually stayed until 5.